Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to speak to you today, and thank you for tuning in to listen. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you are safe and well during these challenging times, so to speak. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has impacted us all personally, and we've had to look at the way we conduct our personal life and rethink our normal, the normal way of doing things. But what I want to think about for the moment is how COVID-19 has impacted the way that we do business today, or more specifically, how can we as an industry move pharmaceutical products around the world when a huge proportion of the normal way that we do that, i.e. airplanes, have simply stopped flying? Well, this is a question that's been keeping us here at Envirotainer up all night, and we've been giving it a lot of thought. As the world leader in active air freight transport solutions for temperature sensitive pharmaceuticals, I can honestly say that the challenges brought about by COVID-19 are unprecedented in the 35 years that we've been doing business. Right now, we support the industry by moving an average of 2 million doses of medicine each day. And frankly, it's essential that we continue to do that, not only for our business and our clients, but ultimately for the patient. So today, you'll be listening to the thoughts and reflections of myself on this subject. I've been working as a global key account manager for Envirotainer for 5 years, and I have some commercial and operational experience in healthcare outside of logistics. And my role now deals directly with blue chip pharma companies, including Lilly, BMS, Roche, and others, and we support their cold chain logistics. And I'm hoping that this presentation will be relevant and useful to you to hear some of the examples of how we're supporting the industry right now to overcome some of those COVID-19 challenges. And I want to share with you a couple of specific cases where pharma companies and Envirotainer are working to find novel solutions. My hope is that for those of you still wrestling with those challenges, you might be able to find a new novel approach, or at least get some inspiration that there are potential solutions out there. So let's look at the challenge and let's look at it as simply as we can. In the past, in the business as usual world, we had a very predictable level of patient demand for pharma products. It was growing each year, but it was relatively stable. Air freight capacity was certainly sufficient to cope with that demand until February, March this year, when along came COVID-19 and the world starts to issue travel bans and planes are grounded. And as a result, air freight capacity simply dries up overnight. Now, rather inconveniently for us, our patients didn't miraculously stop getting sick. And although the world moved its focus to the treatment and prevention of COVID-19, patients with heart disease, diabetes, and cancer, and other chronic illnesses still needed treatment. And we saw, as a result of that, air freight rates became volatile as demand outweighed supply, and airline costs simply skyrocketed. Now, that's a financial challenge in itself. However, I want to focus on the physical or operational challenge of capacity. Namely, how can we bridge that gap between the number of doses in medicine that still need to move by air and the limited space that we now have to do it? And it's that question that's been on the minds of every pharma logistics manager that I've spoken to recently. And I want to share with you some common themes in the way that we've seen them react. Do you recognize any of these stages of reaction, for example? But first of all, stage one was, okay, so COVID-19's here. How can we keep doing business as usual and keep the costs down as much as possible? Admittedly, that was the initial reaction, and it was fairly short-lived and changed quickly to the second stage, which is, okay, so we can't move forward with business as usual anymore. We're going to have to make some significant changes, and that will incur new costs. At this point, we saw companies making some fairly major changes, reprioritizing their product distribution model, maybe moving some less vital medicines by other means, ocean, for example. And we saw them change suppliers, moving to different airlines that had capacity, and in some cases, moving away from passenger planes and into cargo. And these kind of methods worked very well, at least for the early adopters. But you can't get away from the fact that capacity in the market simply wasn't enough to cope with the demand, which left some pharma companies thinking, okay, what on earth do we do now? And to put it crudely, even if the pharma company went out to the industry with an open checkbook and abandoned any form of budget control, there simply wasn't space available to move that product by air. And they felt very much like they were out of options. COVID-19 didn't just affect the pharma shippers, it also affected Envirotainer. We had to make some changes to our business model. We rely very heavily on airlines as our primary means to relocate our empty containers back to where they're needed. And with limited air capacity to do that, we started to have problems in positioning our containers to where our customers needed them. So we had to change our business model quite dramatically, introducing more flexible leases, shorter and longer versions, but most significantly by introducing what we call one-way leases, which meant the airline didn't have to return the empty container at the end of the lease. They could leave it at destination and instead use that space for cargo. Well, this had a knock-on effect to our business because it slowly put our global fleet out of balance. And while we're lucky to have the largest fleet in the industry, and that certainly helped buy us some time, we ended up having to incur more cost of repositioning as we lent heavily on ocean and truck for repo instead of air. We also saw a shift in what our customers wanted. New trade lanes, new release points with new partner airlines coming on board. So we had to work quickly to ensure that all the relevant stakeholders were fully on board and fully trained and ready to handle the Envirotainer units. But the take-home message from this is that COVID-19 has affected the entire industry. The challenges may be slightly different, but we've all certainly realized that we need new ways of working to overcome those challenges. Now, at Envirotainer, we believe that there's far more value in working together in a true partnership rather than acting as a mere supplier. And in fact, we've worked very hard to build close relationships with all of the stakeholders in the cold chain: freight forwarders, airlines, ground handlers, trucking agents, and the pharma company shipper themselves directly. And it's because of this that we can sit down and discuss the challenges together, making suggestions based on the experience that we've seen the industry try over the years across the world. And I want to present a couple of real life examples now of how that collaborative approach has worked. In the first example, we're talking about a large US biopharma company who are moving weekly batches of oncology products, which you'll appreciate are highly time and temperature sensitive. In fact, their current setup was to move 6,000 doses a week using small passive boxes to keep the product cool during transport. Now, their biggest issue was that air freight capacity had simply dried up, and they didn't know how they were going to get their products from A to B. And when they came to Envirotainer, honestly, they were at stage 3 of that realization. Now it's just about moving the medicine. They knew they needed to do something radical, and cost was not a factor anymore. So how did we approach this? Well, in short, we sat down with the client and used a consultative approach to map out the challenge and then look at all of the options together. It was vital to both parties that we considered the process, what could we do differently, and what was needed from both sides to implement those changes quickly. Quality was paramount. We're dealing with highly sensitive products here. So we needed to ensure that whatever solution we came up with had the same risk profile or better than their current solution. And then despite cost not being the main concern, it was still crucial to assess the impact on the logistics budget for any changes that they wanted to make, so they could plan their spending or forewarn of any budgetary impact. So what was the outcome? Well, when you lay the facts out, the solution itself became self-evident in this case, at least. With air capacity significantly limited, how could they continue to move the same number of doses of medicine, but using a smaller volume? The current setup had worked really well while space on the aircraft was available. So we looked at a different secondary packaging option. The small passive boxes that they'd been using meant that they were unfortunately shipping a lot of air rather than product in the form of the insulating material and the coolant, etc., that was going along. And in fact, it took 80 approximately small passive boxes to ship one batch of medicine, which took up around 9 meters cubed on the aircraft. By putting the entire batch onto a single pallet and using an Envirotainer RKN active unit, they were able to get that volume down by half to just over 4 meters cubed. So the maths are simple, whichever way you look at it. With a relatively small change in the way that they pack their product, pallets, not boxes, they found a solution that took 50% less volume to ship the same number of doses to patients. And consequently, they're now fighting for less space on those aircrafts. So we've solved the volume issue, but what about the risk? Well, it's not a surprise to hear that the temperature-controlled air freight industry still has inherent risk within it, particularly when you consider that a typical pharma product moving from, say, North America to the Middle East or Africa could undergo a temperature shift or a temperature range of up to 50 degrees at certain times of year. Most of that risk comes from the unpredictability within the entire journey, timetabling of events, but we don't want products left exposed to high extreme temperatures on the tarmac, for example, for too long. And we certainly don't want the journey time to be held up at certain points along the way. It makes it very difficult to predict the temperature range that a product will experience and the time of journey. And this is where having the backup of an extra layer of protection through a proactive secondary packaging unit that can sense and react to the external and the internal temperature. And it's crucial to maintaining product stability. And that extra layer of protection is particularly important for biologics. So the client in this case was happy that this approach satisfied their risk question by adding in an extra layer of protection. In fact, it was less risky than their previous method. So the next question, of course, is, well, what is this new solution going to cost? How would making this change impact their budget? And for that, we sat down again with them and we did a full total landed cost analysis. And here I can't stress how important it is. I can't stress enough how important it is to consider all of their cost factors when we're making a change like this. I mean, it's true, for example, that the lease cost of an Envirotainer active unit is more than the purchase cost of the passive boxes. So the client was expecting, honestly, an increase in their budget for this new way of working. However, it's not that simple. And when you add in the air freight cost now of moving less volume, you'll find that the two solutions are actually on par with each other. So there's a zero net cost to change. When looking at cost, though, I think it's important that you don't stop there. And we went on to look in detail at the remaining ancillary costs for each option, which included monitoring, handling and prep, disposal of the passive packaging, and any refrigerant and charging costs, amongst others. And at the end of this exercise, the total landed cost to ship each batch was actually lower in the newer way of working. So to summarize, if you remember, the client was initially concerned about volume, about risk, and about cost. And in looking at this challenge together, we were able to find a new solution that moved the same amount of product in less space, with greater protection and less risk. And because mainly the difference in the chargeable weight, a lower cost, 20% lower in the end. So imagine if everybody did this exercise. What would the impact to the industry be now if we could free up space on all the aircraft out there? Food for thought. So I want to move on now and talk about another case study involving a more radical solution, so to speak. In this case, the shipper went to more extreme lengths to secure supply of medicine. Because the regular volumes were significantly higher than in the previous example, air capacity simply didn't exist in the market. And now with the increase in air freight rate, it was becoming extremely expensive to move products anyway. And for this client, time had run out. Stocks and supplies in the market had run out completely, particularly in China. So now we're looking at a pharma company that's going to move outside of its area of expertise and start chartering their own planes, which I think you'll agree is an extreme but necessary option, I think, in this case. Arguably, there's a certain amount of risk to chartering your own plane, but what's certain is that the stakes are now certainly higher. There are, of course, the financial risks. The cost of a charter is huge. Therefore, if things go wrong or the plane leaves without using every ounce of space available, then it has an even bigger impact on the product, the company, and ultimately the patient. Uh, Also, you have a large consolidation risk now. For example, you're moving one entire manufacturing run in one plane. And aside from the other operational risks of new airports, new lanes, new ground handlers, etc., they face their own internal risks. Could manufacturing supply enough product on time to the tarmac? Because of course, there's no plane leaving tomorrow if you miss this flight. This is the one. And then finally, could they source enough secondary packaging in the right place at the right time to support this flight? So again, we sat down with the customer and we looked in detail at each of these risks, and we tried to find the best possible solution that we could. In a charter situation, you're not buying space anymore. You've paid for the entire plane, if you like. So it's about the best use of that space, maximizing the amount of product you can move per flight. And at first, it seemed simple. We could help maximize the load on the plane. In this particular case, their product was already palletized to fit nicely into their existing passive twin pallet packaging solution, as you can see. But together we explored a different format. We looked at the RAP format, which is capable of holding 5 Euro pallets of product. So the theory here is simple. One RAP unit takes up the same number of positions on a plane as 2 of their current twin pallet containers, but it can effectively handle 1 extra pallet. So as long as they're using Euro pallets, we can fit 25% more product onto each charter flight, as this somewhat elaborate animation here demonstrates. So all worked well in this case, but not everybody is using Euro pallets, EU pallets. So it may not be applicable. So we wanted to go one step further and look at how they build their current pallets. And we started with the full details of the actual carton size of the pharma product and the internal dimensions of a number of suitable secondary packaging options. And from this, you can do a full load optimization exercise and calculate the actual number of product boxes that you can fit theoretically into each of the options. And in this case, we explored various options. We looked at different pallet formats, custom pallet sizes, smaller low profile pallets. And at one stage, we even looked at throwing the pallet away completely and just using 2 centimeter spaces. The outcome was certainly eye-opening, and depending on the route that they wanted to go down, they found that they could fit 35 up to 35% more product in that on that one flight. This was a very detailed analysis with many possible options, each of which having different levels of pain to change in their manufacturing and their packing SOPs. But the take-home message in this case study is clear. Load optimization is key. And this is regardless of whether you're moving product on a very expensive charter or whether it's business as usual. There are big gains to be had by doing a load optimization exercise thoroughly with the right level of detail. So in summary, we found new ways of working together that took some of the risk out of the charter flight and also maximized space on board. Admittedly, Envirotainer weren't able to help with their own internal timetabling risks around delivering product to tarmac on time. But in this case, the client was able to forecast their packaging needs so well, so accurately, and their timing so accurately, that together we actually entered into an agreement whereby Envirotainer guaranteed the availability of those RAP units when and where they were needed. We were able to put a number of backup units in place locally as a contingency plan. And because our operating costs at least are predictable, we could guarantee the least cost of each container for this and for future charters, which gave them predictability to their budgets going forward. Okay, so that's the 2 case studies. Thanks for your attention. I've shown some of the challenges that COVID-19 has brought to our industry, at least from one perspective. But I hope also that I've demonstrated a few novel ways that our clients are looking at these challenges, and I'm very happy to say are overcoming those challenges. And I want to end now by considering the future and trying to draw some positive from the corona chaos, so to speak. You'll remember the 3 stages of concern. Well, COVID-19 has certainly forced us to look with fresh eyes at all aspects of the way that we do business. The first stage being, can I keep my costs the same as before by maybe working harder or smarter? Soon realized that, okay, we're going to have to make some changes now. And the market's changed, so our costs are inevitably going to go up. And it wasn't long before, wow, air freight space is completely gone. Cost is now out of the window. And I'm asking, what does the future look like? But we found that not only are there novel ways of moving product that bring efficiency and increased risk, but the big surprise here, at least in the 2 cases I've presented, were in fact that the costs were lower than expected. And in some cases, they were lower than the previous way of doing business, the normal way. So now our clients are seriously considering whether they make this new way of working the new normal. And imagine what a difference it would make if we all thought that way. So in closing then, it's clear that there are still challenging times ahead for all of us, and we don't yet know the full extent of the COVID-19 impact. And we don't know how long its influence will linger after the physical virus has disappeared. We have to accept that there is no longer a normal way of doing business, at least for the foreseeable future. And therefore, it's more important than ever that we work together in close collaborative partnerships and that we keep talking to each other. Together, with the right attitude and the right approach, I'm confident that we'll get through this and we'll find those new ways of working that are needed. Together, we'll find the new normal, and we may be pleasantly surprised at what that new normal looks like. Thank you very much.